Hello and welcome. Hopefully everyone has their coffee and we're ready to get started. I am Dr. Erin Makarius and this is Dr. Dachner, and we are academics, management consulting. We're kind of a package deal, so anywhere you see us, we're always together. And one of the reasons for this is because we met because we're both PhDs of the same university, and we started our own informal alumni program of that university, and that's what kind of got us interested in this area. So you can kind of see our bio here. I am an associate professor of management at the University of Akron in Ohio. And I am interested in research on managing organizational, technical, and global boundaries. So of course, alumni networks of, moving in and out of organizations, work-life balance, remote work, and employee mobility.
Hi, I'm Dachner, and Erin already introduced me to an extent. My research primarily focuses on my initial drive to go to grad school, which was to focus on employee learning and development, instructional design. My dissertation was on the future of employee development. So I've always really been interested in this idea of careers and how people move through a career, what turnover and retention strategies there are, how we develop people for the next job. So when Erin and I started talking about all this alumni stuff, I'm like, ooh, that's an extension of this. And so I kind of study all those things, and really my primary goal, and really why we're here and do things like this, is to connect the academic research to practice and make it useful. In our first seminar, we were told 90% of your manuscripts won't get into the first journal you submit them to, and no one's ever going to read them anyway. And so I was like, I'm going to change that. And so here we are trying.
So we just wanted to get a sense of who's all in the room today as well. So how many of you are alumni curious, that you don't yet have an alumni program, but you're interested in starting one? Raise your hands, just you. Okay. How many have a relatively new, maybe 1 to 2 year alumni program? Okay. And how many have maybe established program, maybe 3 to 5 years around? Anyone longer than 5 years? All right. How long is yours?
This year is 26.
All right. And one of you had a longer one?
10 years.
10 years. Great.
And any other academics in the room?
All right. Well, to give a sense of, what we've been studying in this, and as Ali mentioned, one of the reasons we love coming here is because, we are studying this, but we want to see what happens in practice. And so yesterday was such a great way to see that a lot of the things that we're doing are happening in organizations. And so at the end, we'll have a QR code that you can actually have access to all of these articles. But our research really started in looking at this idea of how offboarding could be a transition into the alumni world. We have an article in the Harvard Business Review of that. We then looked at corporate alumni programs specifically, how to start them, what kind of measurements you should be taking, those outcomes like revenue and recruiting. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about this one throughout our session today, but we looked at how this plays a role in managing mobility overall and the talent flow process. And so, taking those unique offboarding, the climate in the organization and alumni programs and connecting them together. And then we also have an article on post-separation value that really focuses on that human capital management that we heard about yesterday. How do you measure that? How do you get to that point? So we'll talk about some of those elements today. So we wanted to start off, we heard a lot yesterday about what and how to do in alumni programs, and we want to talk about who, focus on the alumni program leader today and what that role looks like. And then talk about making those connections of integrating alumni programs into talent management and how to develop and support alumni program leaders.
Okay, so here's the background, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. A lot of what we're sharing today, we want to make sure was unique. We're coming from a very different angle. We're looking at a lot of programs all together, right? While each individual's experience is a single case study, we're really trying to understand this at a higher level. And so we've been for the last 5 years conducting interviews with corporate alumni program leaders. Maybe some of you are in that sample. We've been analyzing those interviews. We've held some focus groups. We've done surveys with alumni. We've analyzed different websites of the different programs. And we've attended events like this. And so we're really trying to, when we weren't on the program yesterday, it's like, we get to learn all day long. And so it was really fun for us to be in that scenario, because that's what we're trying to do, is just learn what's happening and match the phenomenon in practice to what we know from the research that's already established. So what we're going to share today really comes from the research we've been doing in all these different spaces. And Erin mentioned yesterday, we focused a lot on what companies are doing and how they're doing them. This approach that we're using, trying to gather evidence and really aggregate it, allows us to get at the mechanisms of why are these things happening? How do we influence the behaviors of alumni? What are the attitudes when they leave? How do we predict what they're going to want in the future, rather than looking back at the descriptive statistics we have? And so that's really the pipeline we're trying to build in our research. Okay. So one thing, and I know this probably seems preliminary, but I'm really happy to hear so many programs are still early in their life cycle, because one thing I was really astounded by in our interviews was this idea that when I asked people what their roles are, it was vastly different. And all these people identify or define their role as being some type of program leader for corporate alumni, and yet so many of the positions required very different responsibilities, very different size teams, very different, some people were doing sustainability and corporate social responsibility and corporate alumni programs. Some people had full-time employees, others didn't. And so it was so vastly different. And my background, as I mentioned, is in instructional design and HR. And so I'm like, how do we integrate alumni programs into talent management if in a lot of places the job's not even well defined yet? Because we all know it starts with a well-defined job. So we're not going to take too long on this, because I realize depending on the company, the size, the industry, the resources, the maturity level of the program, the job's description will look different. But I do think it's important to at least reflect and think about, what do alumni program leaders need? Who makes good alumni program leaders? So I'm going to answer what we found from our research first, and then I'm going to ask you what you think's missing. So we found that alumni program leaders came from all different backgrounds, some from higher ed, some from marketing. And a lot of times it depended on the goal of the program. But really, what was fascinating was the number of people who said they fell into the position. It just happened. All right. And so I think that's really interesting, because, again, my HR-minded person is like, how do we onboard and train and develop someone in a role that's not defined and they just fell into and we don't know if they're qualified for? So I think this is just a starter of a conversation for how to support people in roles like many of you have. As you all know, and was mentioned yesterday, they're housed in all different departments, oftentimes based on the goals of the program, but again, sometimes by chance. And so thinking about where do and should they fit. I mentioned just a minute ago, a lot of people work with different areas, and something we're going to talk about later when we get to our alumni program research is this idea that we have to have an internal network that buys into the program. And I know you all know this. I heard people say it over and over yesterday, but who people worked with, who they saw as their partners in the organization varied widely. And then in terms of what people do, Erin mentioned our paper that talks about what a program is. Many of you talked about that yesterday, but it was interesting to see that so many people thought that shifting the mindset about turnover and generating buy-in was their job. And we weren't seeing that reflected on the job descriptions we did find, or the people that we did talk to that weren't in the leadership position. So I know some companies have good job descriptions. I found one or two of them. I looked at ononline.org, tried to find one. I did Google searches. Anyways, I pulled this from ChatGPT. So take it for what it is. But I'm just curious if you could take a second to read it. And then we're going to go to the next slide with a couple of questions about, does this capture it? Is this the job of a corporate alumni program manager? And I call it that, even though I know different people have different titles. Could be alumni relations, might not have manager. But just in general, if this was how we were defining your job, I'm just curious, does this capture the essence of the position? So ChatGPT did a good job. Okay, so then my follow-up questions are, given that that's what we want people to be able to do, who are the people in these roles? And I'm asking this not because I think we need to hire people to fill your positions, but to develop people in these roles, we need to understand who should be in them and what they're doing. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about like what knowledge, skills, and abilities, tasks, duties, and responsibilities, like who are we looking for to lead these programs? Who's going to be successful? What is it that they really have to be able to do well? And maybe some people just fall into the job, don't.
I think one of the things that we've seen that people have to be able to do is they have to be really effective at networking within their organization, because alumni tends to touch everything, or even if it's not everything, it touches quite a few areas of the business, and you've got to be able to hustle those other bits of the business to support you. If you can't do that, your job's really, really hard.
Thank you. And you'll see that's a theme we're going to touch on today.
As someone who's been at Morgan Stanley for many, many years, but recently sort of fell into the role, as you would say, I'm curious, people who might be newer to the roles and or newer to the companies that they're now in the roles in, if those presents different challenges. Even though I fell into the role, a benefit I had was just the knowledge of my company and the way it works, and people who might have left 10 years ago, but where they are now, and the ability to reach out to them. But obviously, you know, someone who might be more established with alumni networks coming in would bring their own expertise. So just that balance.
So yeah, and I love that you said that, because you need the institutional knowledge to be able to have that network internally, but you also have to know how to run the program. So I think that's a good way to put those two pieces together. Does someone over here have their hand up? Oh, a couple. Sorry.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good.
Am I good? Good morning. I think it's really quite an interesting role, particularly because, yes, you do need to be brilliant at networking and at all levels, but you also need to be somebody who's great with data and not afraid to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. And in my experience, that's not always found in the same person, in one person.
Coming from a former librarian, I believe.
Correct.
And then I'll give you two a chance, and then we'll.
Sure. Just echoing off of Heidi's point, it's not only about understanding the data and diving into it, but also being able to tell an effective story and finding alumni that will really exemplify your program and the values you want to show, and also just to be able to inspire the people around you.
And I think somebody else alluded to this. I don't think it's just one person, because depending on where you are, implementing, especially in a large organization, takes a very different skill set than just the networking. So implementing and standing up is a very different body of work than running an established or ongoing program or refreshing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so I mean, that's to the point that level of maturity may depend on who is appropriate for this, but the combination of networking, building community, having the data, telling a story with the data, and understanding the role in this particular company are all super important. So thank you for helping me do that. I know that's my own challenge I was having with this idea that we've talked to, we interviewed about 35 people, and the job description or the way they talked about the jobs were all so vastly different. I just wanted to hear from all of you, so I appreciate that. So our main findings in those interviews, and they kind of align with what many of you've said, is that some of the things that were overlooked when people described their job, but we heard them saying throughout their interviews later, were that there was a lack of connection with all of talent management. And this was kind of to Matt's talk yesterday about the offboarding and how important that is. And so we do some research on exit management and offboarding. We were seeing some disconnection there. We were seeing alumni programs that were wonderfully built and constructed with amazing leaders. We loved all the people we talked to. but when people are coming off of a bad work experience, that only does so much. And so it really has to be tied in throughout all of talent management. As I mentioned, we saw that people thinking that they needed to shift the mindset. And one thing we'll talk about later is this, I don't want to call everyone middle managers, but you may have exec support, and this was to Emma's panel, but if you don't have support from the people managing the people, you're going to have a challenge as well. And we saw a lot of disconnect there at that level. So the focus on generating buy-in from executives was actually being done better. My CEO loves this idea, but it wasn't trickling down in the same way. And then also, and here's for all of you, we see a really strong need for kind of learning and development of people in these roles. So we started with defining the job. We're going to end with some possible learning and development opportunities, but an opportunity to have a community like Emma's trying and team are trying to build, the Alumni ACEs, potential courses, certifications, whatever it may be. It's time. Alumni programs are growing, and we heard there was a desire for those things.
Yeah, when we first did our interviews of alumni leaders, often the question we get asked is, how can we get a degree in alumni management or a certificate or some sort of educational credential to show that we do have the right skill sets for this particular role? And we looked, and there's not one available yet. So there's an opportunity there. So, this arose from our overlooked findings here of there is a need to integrate the alumni management into the talent management process. As Ali mentioned, you could have the best alumni program, but if people are having a bad employee experience, then they're not going to want to join that alumni program, and they're probably going to want to cut those ties. And so this integration really starts with what we've called this climate for career mobility. And we'll tell you a little bit more about what that looks like in managing mobility actively within the organization. And then continues through that employee offboarding process, that transition from being an employee to an alumni. And then goes into the alumni management program. So climate for career mobility gets at this idea of a mindset. So a lot of times when people leave, there are managers or people in the organization who will call them traitors, right? That they feel like they're really just abandoning the organization. And so there's sometimes these negative associations with mobility, but the reality of our work environment today is that people will leave, right? And whether it's after a few years or upon retirement, no one stays in an organization forever. And so we've defined climate for career mobility as shared employee perceptions about the extent to which the organization supports internal and external movement. And so this is really the idea that you have kind of a climate within the organization that supports discussions of mobility, that talks about, where do you want to go next? And that might be within our organization. So internal mobility could be part of that discussion, but maybe it's somewhere else, or maybe it's an entirely different career. And so thinking about those discussions and having practices in place that support employee movement. And this also recognizes that there are barriers to movement that occurs within the organization. So I want to talk a little about, have you guys heard about hoarding talent? Anyone have talent hoarders in the organization? So in academia, hoarding talent is called guarding talent. You're kind of preventing them from making that next move. And so there's been some research done in that area. But think about your own organizations. What might managers or teams or your practices, what kind of things might be happening in your company that might be either intentionally or unintentionally guarding talent, preventing people from moving?
Thank you. So we have return of service. So in the Air Force, if you do kind of certain courses, I don't think it takes certain jobs. Basically, you have to give a number of years back afterwards as well. We have like degree programs as well. So yeah, they're trying to keep you so that you don't kind of go with those skills. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the research says that, hugging employees too tight of trying to hoard them and keep them in your organization has the opposite effect. It actually pushes them out faster.
I don't want to say from my perspective, because then I sound like that as a employer, but when I think about this, I think if you find someone who's really good, we all really want to hoard, guard,
right,
star talent, interesting people that are helping us do our jobs. We know that by losing them, it might impact us. So basically, when you have someone good, you want to keep hold of them tightly, which might not always be the right thing to do, I'm sure.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to see that having that. And so, the initial research on this climate for career mobility and having an environment that's supportive of movement actually finds that they might be more likely to stay if you are allowing them to have those conversations and having a psychologically safe climate to discuss that movement in organizations. So what do you think can be done to help facilitate movement? What might be some ideas to kind of encourage employee movement?
I think we we don't. I have not seen intentionally people guarding talent, but I think what we can do is socializing talent movement. People don't talk a lot about, you are free to go here, there. So if we start talking a lot about, it's there in an HCM book somewhere hidden, but it's not spoken a lot. And if that kind of climate is nurtured, then probably people will feel a lot psychologically safe, and they'll opt in to stay as opposed to finding things outside.
Yeah, and it's a good point. It's driven by the norms. So it has to just become a norm to have these types of conversations. Did you have something you had your hand raised?
Oh, I know that in a few organizations that I know of, they have rotational programs. So individuals able to have for a 3 to 6 month increment, and that facilitates a level of inquiry or curiosity around some roles where skill sets can be translated.
That's great. And the rotational programs.
I think also making sure that it's known what each person does in their role. So I think sometimes people tend to unintentionally gatekeep their job just because they know it so well. But I think to the extent that you can make sure, your manager can make sure that that's documented to the best extent, then there's not a concern that, oh, if I lose this person, no one else can do the role. And it encourages mobility because there is that confidence that that job can be transferred to someone because the day-to-day is known.
And I think that aligns with giving continuous learning and development opportunities to that employee so they see that there is opportunities beyond that current role as well. Any others?
I think you have to incentivize managers to do it because, like Emma said, what's in it for them if they lose good people? So I think you can do that financially, but I think probably the more effective way is creating norms and having kind of a social incentive. And I think there's also a way to capitalize on people's, I think, innate motivation to have a legacy. And you can give people and talk about people's reputation for developing talent and give people credit and visibility. This person creates future leaders, right? And so this idea of like you think of the great coaches, like their coaching tree, like that's real cred. And that's something that people, again, like their legacy is built upon. So having conversations about that, highlighting that, I think is a way to also facilitate this type of culture.
Celebrating managers that do that. Yeah, and I'm sure you know this, there's research on internal mobility that looks at managers that give promotions, find other opportunities in the organization. They are seen more positively, their reputation goes up, and they have an easier time recruiting to fill positions. Did you have something?
Our firm does secondments, so people are physically moving. So you can do a secondment to India for 2 years or something like that once you're sort of established as a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That was one of when we found in our research that organizations were doing that help you, kind of see what life is like somewhere else and give you another opportunity.
Something we've been able to do, which is maybe easier for us because we are so much smaller than the rest of you, but is whenever we have a new job, we try and look at who in our company could do that job, no matter what function they're in. Let's look at that before we put a job outside. And that's given quite a few people the opportunity to move from one completely different job to another, but then we try and make that very, very visible, so that people understand it's possible. And all of a sudden you start to find a lot of people put their hands up and go, hey, I've been doing this for the last 2 years, but I'd really like to go and do that over there.
Yeah, and even, succession planning, we think a lot about for top executives or leaders in the organization, but it can be done all throughout the company and look at what are those opportunities, helping people see pathways more clearly. So I know this table is small. This is in one of our papers, but I'll just go through some of the examples, our findings, and kind of going through research about what could be done to encourage this climate for career mobility. We found examples of workforce planning, so reallocating talent. So in addition to this incumbents, we had external employee sharing. During COVID, there were grocery stores that were taking restaurant workers and kind of sharing employees among different organizations. Integrating technology, so thinking about gamification and AI and that idea of what's actually happening in the job, what are the skill sets that need to be developed further, and giving people previews. So we saw in recruitment having these gamification could help people have kind of that realistic job preview. Job design of enabling role and relational boundary spanning and optimizing flexibility, doing things like work from anywhere, or we saw shadow boards where junior employees were asked to sit on a board to get exposure and kind of see what things were like in the organization and how things were run. And attracting movers. So we talk a lot about boomerangs, but there's also people who do a lot of movement. And so making it okay to hire people who have gaps in their resumes or may have been moving from job to job, that making that an okay norm within organizations. Helping facilitate career transitions. This is probably the one you're most familiar with, honoring boomerangs, alumni programs, celebrating external moves, whether it's on LinkedIn or social media or whatever that might look like, and supporting leaves of absence, and then, Matt, to your point, offering financial rewards for mobility. There's some organizations that do pay to quit or alumni referral bonuses or just alumni discounts that, even as alumni, we're celebrating you that you've left the organization. So a number of different ways to kind of support that climate for career mobility and start to have this feeling that it's okay to think about what's next.
All right, so now I'm going to talk about number 2, exit management and employee offboarding. And really, even though our interest in doing research together was on alumni, we really, given my interest in, and our interest, but my preliminary interest in the turnover and career management, focused and honed in a lot on offboarding. And our first publication in Harvard Business Review was called, was about offboarding. And so we've been thinking a long time, and in our interviews, we actually asked a lot of the people we talked to either tell us what they think offboarding is or what exit management is, and we've shared our definition and incorporated some of it. And ultimately, the way we think about offboarding and exit management, at least right now, is all formal and informal practices, programs, and policies enacted or engaged in by an organization or its agents to facilitate employee adjustment upon separation from an organization. And we take this definition from the onboarding literature. And so when we were looking at exit management, we look at all the strategic HR practices that exist. There's tables of all the strategic HR practices, and exit management is one of them, and it talks about turnover and retention, and it talks about exit surveys. And there's not a whole lot of research on that experience. There is from an individual level about leavers, but not as much from an organization level. And so we really have been thinking a lot about what does offboarding look like? What does exit management look like? In the 90s, there was a lot on outplacement services and mass layoffs. So we pull from that a little bit. But again, that's outdated, and that's in involuntary turnover. So we're trying to think about exit management in a way that affects how people feel when they leave. So in our most recent theory paper about post-separation value, we term that turnover affect. And so we think that it's not necessarily whether someone leaves voluntarily or involuntary that totally matters. I mean, it does, but it's the way they feel when they leave that's going to predict their attitudes and behaviors as alumni. And so, to Matt's point yesterday, I think Jillian shared the example of someone who she reached out to and improved their thoughts about referring people. In that paper, we call these shift parameters. So positive or desirable exit management, positive or desirable alumni management can shift people off the normal track they might be on from the affect that when they were leaving. So people may feel excited, they may feel guilty, they may feel sad. however people feel when they leave, the company's agency or control in that, in what they do subsequently as alumni, comes from exit management and alumni management. And so that's what we talk about in the paper. And so that's what we really think is important to a room full of you all, because that offboarding piece is so essential. And yet we keep hearing over and over, it's disconnected a lot of times from the alumni program. And so you don't really have a say in how exit management goes. And that makes it really tricky. And so the thinking is, how do we embed this more in our thinking of alumni is the exit management piece. The first question, we didn't see Matt's slides ahead of time, looks a little bit like his. So we're happy to field that question still, but, and it's exciting to be on the same page as other academics. But we really want to know, we're leaning more into the how do people feel? And we know the reason people leave influence that, but what does your company do to try to influence how people feel when they leave? And we know there's probably some really good examples and some really bad examples. Sometimes it comes down to the individual manager. But are there any things, policies, practices that help people feel either good or especially bad about leaving? Emma jumped at this opportunity.
I did, mainly because of the people to my right. So actually what I was thinking when you were speaking is there are some companies that in many ways it's almost like a rite of passage to work there, but you may not stay forever. You know, I worked at McDonald's as my first job. There's nothing wrong with working there, but it wasn't my intended long-term career. You know, the stories, and maybe, you know, I might pass the microphone perhaps, is just there are lots of people that I think work in your organization where they're going to work there during college. They totally know that, but they are probably not going to work there forever, which is, you know, is probably a good 25% of the people that we talk to about alumni. They just want to stay in touch with the people they know are definitely going to leave. So I wondered whether that might be relevant to just ask you to share a bit about that.
Yeah, definitely, because, you know, our alumni are predominantly people who came through an internship program, so it's a little bit different. But yeah. Oh, I'm with Southwestern Family of Companies. So we're a company based out of Tennessee that's been around since the 1800s, a direct selling company. A lot of college students come through the program. And we've had a very high success rate of people who, when they do leave, they become very successful politicians, entrepreneurs, because these folks are running their own business when they're with us. So they've got to learn time management. They have to learn, you know, perseverance. They are in control of their own income, that sort of thing. And so you're right. We do expect that the majority of those folks are probably not going to stay with us forever. And so we do balance the how do we keep the people, you know, as many as we can, because they have acquired a ton of skills. But there is also just these are incredibly successful, driven individuals that may be going on to very different careers. And, you know, how do we follow them, engage them, and keep them within the fold, whether it's to bring their children into our internship program, the people they know, the connections they have, and just the goodwill in the community.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? I know this is like such a tricky topic. I heard it yesterday. We see it in our research. We saw it in our interviews. Is there anyone that think their company just like bids farewell in this like really exceptional way that makes people feel good? Yeah.
I was going to add for someone I think is not in the room. So Cleary Gottlieb, I think some of us know Elizabeth Claps quite well in the team there. I'm sharing so that we can all, I think it's a very good example. It's why we gave them an award. They do, and of course it's hard to do this at massive scale, but they do offboarding dinners. And it's look, it's not possible in an organization of 150,000 people, and I'm sure people recognize that. And I'm sure she'd also say they don't do it, can't manage it for everybody everywhere in every corner of the world, but they do have a program where they very much focus on that. So no doubt there must be, and she's not here to speak for herself, there must be some sort of criteria, or it can't be for the whole company. But that is something where when I've sat opposite people from Cleary Gottlieb, unrelated to my day job, they remember that they had a dinner and they give them the business.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just making sure people know we know you might leave, that we know that's okay. We hope you'll stay in touch, send your children here, refer other people you know, that the door is always open, and also having a celebration of some sort. And it doesn't have to be a whole dinner. It could be like any type of celebration or ritual that helps to kind of just provide that closure. I'll come to you next.
I'll just share, excuse me. the example of when I stepped into the program, BlackRock, prior to having an alumni network, when the manager initiated like the exit in the HR system, the departing employee would receive an email with the subject line in all caps termination with their name. I was like, wow, kind of harsh. So I came into that and being like, okay, well, that needs to change ASAP. And that in tune was replaced with like your invitation to the BlackRock Alumni Network. And it's like simple things like that, like communications matter. But I think that like, and that wasn't even for involuntary, that was for everyone, regardless of who you were at the firm, you got that email with the subject line termination. So that's just like an example of comms and like the departing experience matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that example. I mean, I don't love it, but I do love it because I think it's so important because we have to think of messaging. And there's even, that's why when we started talking about turnover affect, we like got so energized by it because this idea of how is the person reading this going to feel? Because that's what matters more than most other things, you know, exactly what the content is, although that would make them feel pretty poor. All right, let's do one more response and then we'll move on.
So obviously it's quite different when you leave the military because it's not just a regular job. What is supposed to happen is you're supposed to have a conversation with your manager. You can basically go and press a number of buttons on your internal HR system, 7 clicks to freedom, some people call it. And what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to have an interview with your manager, but that doesn't always happen. But the Air Force has actually set up what they call the Service Leavers Engagement Cell, where in that HR system, where there's a notification of somebody leaving, someone will actively reach out to you and say, would you like to have a conversation? And I think for a lot of people, it's about feeling heard. And somebody mentioned something yesterday, and I can't remember who it was. You can be really honest in that interview. What have you got to lose kind of thing? You're on the way out anyway. And it just really got me thinking that if that's the only way we're getting the best information about the organisation, then it's too late. Right. And I loved your question on the previous, on this slide here, like how do people who are staying feel? Mm-hmm. Because by the time they've decided, they've gone, it hasn't taken somebody 2 seconds to make that decision. That's probably been like a 6-month plus decision. So I think it's a really important point that you bring up, that engagement kind of needs to start a little bit earlier. We have like dining out nights as well, kind of like you mentioned, Ali, but it can vary. People's experience can be very different. And I think that's kind of your point, Julian, that there needs to be some kind of standardization. How do we want to treat the people that leave? So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The combined efforts of the crowd means that I really don't have to say much on my next slides. So,
but it is interesting because there's a lot of research on layoffs and the messaging in layoffs. And, I know Ali just went to a session on Airbnb and how they were very empathetic, and even a layoff email and the survivor's guilt and survivor's emotions afterwards. So I think you make a good point. It's not only who's leaving and the messaging that you do with that, but it's also who's staying and paying attention to that.
So what we found is basically what you all said. There seems to be some disconnect sometimes, and so what we recommend is exactly what we heard here: is trying to have some type of structured, systematic exit process. It doesn't have to be a grand party or celebration, but being transparent, both in messaging to the people who are staying, because their jobs and their work experience and their network change when their colleagues leave. And so it's important they're in the know, not of the reason, we know personnel decisions are private, but of the fact that this is what's going to happen and here's what's happening going forward. The messaging used for the people leaving, that it's not termination, turn in your key, or your access to our internet and your emails are going to be turned off at this time. Like, that's important information for someone to understand expectations, but it ignores the social piece, the career piece, all the things that people are thinking about when they leave jobs. And so I guess what we are working on right now is a paper where the Climate for Career Mobility table Erin shared with you. We have a paper we're going to submit by the end of summer, and it's really thinking about how something like that mirrors that, but for offboarding and exit management. So what do we do to help people with career transitions out of an organization in a way that models the career transition or socialization process through onboarding? And how do we go through offboarding knowing that we're not going to have the same amount of resources to give it to people leaving? There may not be the same buy-in, but there are some simple things like the messaging of the email that could be consistent across everyone and influence how they feel as they leave. And so we're going to encourage more of a systematic, consistent process with gratitude, clear expectations about what to expect going forward, and in a crowd like this, what they should expect from the alumni program. And I know some of you all have this, but for others that could be really useful to think about. Here's a little, I can't get buy-in from everyone everywhere, but here are some little things we could do at exit that may influence how they feel.
And the last piece, which all of you are probably the most familiar with, focusing on corporate alumni programs, which we talk about serving as this means for extending the employee life cycle. So this idea that's integrated into that talent management process and connected to offboarding and the climate for career mobility, that it all has to work together. And so with this, we believe it has to be strategic. There has to be intentional elements that you're trying to engage alumni in meaningful ways to recognize the associated benefits. And so, we talked a lot about what's included. And so one of the things we want to focus on for this is the value proposition for alumni of why they might want to be engaged. And so this really gets at those mechanisms that, yes, of course, we want to have boomerangs and better recruitment and revenue and all of these things that are great for the organization. But in order to get there, you have to focus on what's in it for them and why would an alumni want to continue to be engaged with an organization. And so, we kind of covered some of these yesterday, but just wanted you to think about, why do alumni stay engaged? What differences do you see in various groups of alumni? Is it by ages or career stages? Are there different reasons why alumni might want to stay engaged? When you mentioned career yesterday, but it might be likely that people at an earlier career stage might want those job opportunities more than those at a later career stage. So there might be differences there. What trends or important topics do you think you need to be considered when we think about the future and what learning and community building experiences? So let's focus on that first question. Why do you think alumni stay engaged? What's in it for them?
Thank you. Certainly for us, I think with the Royal Air Force being seen more as a family than just a corporation, when people move on, joining the alumni network allows them to stay connected with their family. It's essentially, it's a company or an organization that you never really leave. It becomes such a fundamental part of the core of who you are that joining the program, joining RAF Galaxy, allows you to stay connected with your family no matter where you are in the world and no matter where they are.
I think that's a great example, especially, you think about university alumni programs and the pride that you feel of being an alumni of that university is why often alumni in universities want to stay connected.
I was actually just going to ask you all, because I always think that the alums who stay engaged, all comes down to their experience at the firm. So if they had a terrible experience at the firm, you could do as much as you can, but they're still not going to engage. They're going to, and so many people obviously have alumni networks now, but they're going to engage with the alumni network that they had the most positive experience at while working at the firm.
Absolutely. I think it has to be integrated with that talent management. And if you have a bad experience, why would you? You wouldn't feel that sense of identification with the firm. So yeah, it has to stay there.
So some of the mechanisms we look at are, and this is to this point, the legacy identification. So the idea that I worked and I still want to identify there, and it could be affective. It could be I really loved the people I worked with, or I loved my work experience, or it could be more of a need for career instrumental type support or guidance. And then it's also, so those attitudes are really what it is. And so if someone has a really bad boss, but they had a good network, they may still have the attitude that I want to stay connected because I like the people who work there, or the prestige of the organization allows me to, share with people that I work with. So the pride or the attitudes that people feel that connect to how people feel when they leave, it naturally is going to have a high correlation with having a good work experience. But we know that employee satisfaction has so many subcomponents. And so if one's really bad, the other good ones could still offset that. So it depends on both their need and their attitude is kind of how we suggest that.
Allie mentioned earlier those shift parameters. So perhaps as managing alumni programs that you identify what those needs might be and then help remind them of, we are a great organization. We can help you find other jobs. We have these tangible benefits, or you still had this great network of people. We want to help you stay connected with them. Maybe it's those relational benefits.
But yes, the happy leavers are going to be the happiest alumni.
Yeah.
I will say also FOMO and perks do really work from our perspective, what we watch. I'm thinking of, for example, a German company that was not popular with its alumni for lots of reasons, but they offered a considerable discount on their services for friends and family that was very material. I'm thinking about retailers who often, and it's not always the value of the item. In fact, yesterday I mentioned Marks and Spencer, so I can just mention them again. Sometimes they offer their special candy, or if you go to the stores and show your alumni card, that you get like a extra donuts at a particular time of year, or an Easter egg or something of that ilk. And those things work, especially for retailers. I know that 6453 is here today, and it's a Nike community. It's not Nike, but there are brands that have the added advantage, as you were saying yesterday. Asset manager, of course, BlackRock is amazing with very nice offices, but it's a bit harder to have like super cool BlackRock swag in a way that like some retailers do. So that does work.
I mean, to that, we're obviously a financial services company. Like, this is like later in our roadmap, but like creating a fund. I think actually is Goldman here today? Goldman has an alumni specific investment fund, which I think is really interesting. That's like sort of on our roadmap, or just like, and this is complicated, like discounts on certain products.
Yeah.
But a very large initiative to work on.
I want to add onboarding a person to an alumni program depends on a good exit environment and how the person feels when he or she is leaving. But retaining that person on the platform is very critical. And I think personalization of the program, and there are several ways, right? If I like to study, for an example, right, and I want to do, let's say PhD for an example, or higher studies for an example, the program should have something to offer which is a natural benefit for me. It's not like I'm hunting for it, but it's a natural benefit. And the corporates have a lot of data about employees on their interest, what do they like, what they don't like, or in what stage of their life they are in. Like, if I have school going kids, right, I have different interests as opposed to if I like a lot of vacations. So if we personalize the program, I think retaining them, and of course, the pride in the company is always there, but that's all will help on day one, but not on day 180.
And I think it was mentioned yesterday, those needs might change over time. And so it's not just one and done, find out what they need, but also continuously getting that information and utilizing it. And I think that ties to the second question of the future of alumni programs and thinking about how to personalize it and customize content more.
Yeah, so I work in higher ed at Columbia University, and so something that we're always highlighting to our recent alumni, as well as our more established alumni, is the affiliate scholarships that we offer for minority students, for disadvantaged students. So I think that we see this trend in corporate alumni relations as well, is that the younger generations are much more focused on purpose and social good. So highlighting the social good that your organization does and the opportunities to connect, I think is going to continue to be very important.
Good point. So a lot of social justice and a lot of opportunities to expand upon that.
We might be a little bit more unique where people are engaged for the reasons of, I think, a disproportionate number of former Nike people start their own companies. So looking to expand their network, looking for talent, and looking to work together on different projects. So those are another reason. Shared passion for the brand, shared passion and shared connection with people that you worked on projects and solved problems together. So those are reasons that people stay together, stay connected.
So one of my favorite things to say as a professor is the answer to most questions in HR and managing people is it depends, right? And so the why question really does depend. And for each individual, you might have very different answers. For each company and industry, you might have different answers. But the point is to really find out more about what are the reasons and what are the mechanisms and how can you personalize that content or customize it more to meet those needs at various stages. So a couple of things that we found are consistent with these reasons that you've identified. Those career reasons, so especially those earlier on in their career, really value things like learning and development, the access to job opportunities. When we do interviews with alumni, many said, I want to leg up if I'm trying to become a boomerang. I want that to be identified, and I want to make sure that I get some sort of advantage if I'm coming back to the organization. Providing access to resources, so these career reasons can be important, or those relational reasons. So the networking, in research, they've identified 2 mechanisms of this residual affective commitment, so that tie that you have to the organization, or the legacy identification that you mentioned earlier of this sense of pride. And I'm proud to have worked here and be a member, and I want to continue to have that. And often those mechanisms are what lead to better recruitment outcomes, more revenue, brand advocacy, posting on Glassdoor, any of those behaviors that alumni will engage in. And not having those can lead to negative behaviors of sabotaging the brand or not referring people. And so there's a lot of opportunities in the offboarding and alumni program process to try to enhance those attitudes, that connection to the organization. It's important to think about the timing. Not all alumni need to be engaged in all things at all times, right? And so it's not a one-size-fits-all type of programs. And so think about, are there natural inflection points or milestone moments that you can re-engage alumni, or think about opportunities that might be relevant for them. Looking at career stages or different elements that might, interest groups, some of the things that we've talked about that might differentiate your alumni segments. And then helping shift mobility mindset. This ties back to the idea of it has to be integrated into how things are in the organization. And so we had a quote that said, older leadership see people that quit or leave the company as traitors or losers. And they're like, why are you investing in these people who are just leaving us? So if you have that kind of mindset in the organization, it's going to be really tough to come in and try to re-engage alumni and get them invested in your programs. And this idea of getting buy-in across the organization is really important. It's a challenge in many opportunities. One of the quotes from our interviews, the biggest challenge is making sure that management understand the opportunity. If it's integrated throughout the company and the talent management process, it becomes part of the DNA. So you mentioned this idea of making it a norm, that it's just something we talk about, people leave, and what are the opportunities after they leave. And then we also found that there's this opportunity for this continuous learning of building upon the experience of mature programs. So when we look about, this ties back to what is an alumni leader, that there is a need for more clear definitions of the leader role, more education. And so Alumni ACEs will help build that community, and hopefully we can start to think about what those development opportunities look like.
And just, if you mind going back one, or will not go back. Okay. To these first 2 boxes here and it relates to what I'm about to present, is what we're trying to test more right now. And so we have preliminary interview data, preliminary survey data that does suggest what Erin mentioned, that, for instance, Owen mentioned people want to be engaged because they want these career advantages. And that's true. And we see that, and that's what we hear. Erin just mentioned that. And yet we have to remember some leavers are retirees, and they're not looking for career opportunities. And so we have to think about, what do they want? Well, oftentimes what we saw in our preliminary data is that younger employees or earlier career employees are looking more for that career support or that social connection with other colleagues. Whereas more advanced career stage people, they're really, what drives them to be engaged is the identification or legacy they want to leave, or they're just not, because they don't have to be. So later career employees are engaged as an alumni because they want to be, or they're not. Whereas earlier career employees are more engaged because they almost feel like they need to be, or they have some type of social need because of their developmental stage or whatever it is. And so just even that simple thing that we started to look at and we're hoping to continue to look at is really important to understand when you think about micro communities or what engages people and how that differs for different people. So we're really, really, really grateful to the Enterprise Alumni Group for inviting us back again. This is our third time coming to New York to be with them. And we are just so grateful every time we come here, and to everyone who shared. Thank you all again for having us and listening to us for a whole hour. We hope it was worth it, and please stay connected.